Father Tom, please just begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and your work with the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on the program. I'm a Jesuit priest. I've been a Jesuit for the past 53 years and a priest for 43 years. As a young priest, I was assigned for the first 13 years to the Diocese of Charlotte, North Carolina, where I served as a pastor up in the mountains and also in Charlotte and in Winston-Salem. And I was the director of planning for the diocese there in the early 80s and 90s. In my studies, I have a doctoral degree in city planning from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So I'm a proud Tar Heel, which can be difficult at Georgetown University every now and then during the basketball season. But my work after my studies was I was the formation director for the Jesuits of the East in the United States. And then I was also the executive secretary of our national office for the Jesuits of the United States and Canada before coming to CARA about 14 years ago. So here at CARA, I'm the executive director, and the areas of research that I've have a particular interest in, naturally enough, would be those research topics dealing with priest and with religious life, but also a particular interest in the impact of a year of volunteer service on young men and women, and also in some of our international research projects. Here at CARA, we have 3 full-time researchers, each with a doctorate in their respective areas, working on that, along with 2 research assistants who assist us in the research. So we're a small team located here in Washington, D.C.
Great. Thanks for filling us in on that. Could you explain what the CARA report is for those who may be unfamiliar?
The CARA report began 30 years ago, and it was our effort. It's a quarterly publication, 4 times a year. It's 12 pages, and we take CARA research, but also other research that's going on around the United States, around the world, that would be relevant to church pastoral decision makers. So the target audience would be from bishops and chancery offices, pastors, parish leaders, different Catholic organization leadership. So it's looking at what's research that might be relevant or interesting for this grouping. So it's been around for 30 years. We have about 1,000 or so subscribers, either on the print version by mail or through Substack.
Oh, great. I actually didn't realize you have a Substack. I'm gonna have to get on
that.
Yeah,
Please.
I didn't
cool.
I didn't realize that CARA's 30 years old. I thought it would went back even further. But
the CARA report is 30 years old.
CARA
itself is 60. We just had our 60th anniversary.
Okay, got it.
That makes sense. By the way, as you were giving a description of yourself, I feel compelled to tell the audience, our listeners, just that you also have a wonderful, distinguished mustache that I'm just really enjoying.
Thank you.
So one of the
I thought you were going to say you were a dookie.
One of the things that we saw in our discipleship study is that people reported a desire, a need for growth in the areas of what we're calling the expressive fruits of discipleship, particularly around the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. Is that resonant with your research at CARA?
Well, I found what was in your report, a little confusing or not clear.
Okay.
And a couple pieces is that the respondents are kind of a select group of very active Catholics.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the larger Catholic population or community there.
That's very much true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the distinction between the spiritual fruits and the expressive fruits. So the expressive fruits in the question talks about corporal works of mercy, and it really just gives a limited, very kind of generic term of what's captured. And whereas on the spiritual fruits, it lists a whole series of more specific activities and actions. So I would have a little concern saying, I'm not sure what the data there is telling us.
Yeah.
because they're not quite comparative, and again, on the expressive part is so generic.
Yeah, let me
Oh,
clarify that maybe if I could. We never asked someone, how are you in the interior life? How are you with the expressive fruits? We never phrased it that way.
right.
Those were our groupings kind of internally that the respondent wouldn't have seen. What they would have seen was the listing of each of these kind of particular areas of discipleship as we express them in the questions. And so the expressive fruits, as we asked them, included how are you with giving? How are you performing the spiritual works of mercy? How are you performing the corporal works of mercy? How are you with detachment and generosity? That's
Yeah.
what expressive fruits consisted of. The was it the interior fruits that you had mentioned? Is the other one that you were?
Yeah, and when I compared it, that has
Yeah,
more specific actions. So
true.
yeah,
Yeah.
my uh, response would be when from the CARA surveys that we've been doing year after year, when we're asking on items, it's interesting that right at the top, usually number 2, is care for the poor as what is important in being a Catholic. And this is large, all of the Catholic population responding. And it's quite notable that that comes out so strong and consistently year after year. Uh, so we find on CARA something a little different, but
Mm-hmm.
some of the differences may well be to the manner in which the question is asked
I
and
see.
the grouping. Uh, so we find that people are on for Catholics uh, very much seeing as part of their faith that they need to take some action to their neighbor in need. And so there's a whole range of items that come under that, but it's clearly a value that's
That
expressed.
that's really interesting. Is it okay I call you Tom? Is that
Yeah, yeah.
okay? I started Tom. Um, that's so interesting because when you're doing a larger survey of Catholics that are not segmented by um, what we're calling active Catholics. Is that what
Mhm.
we were calling it, Dave?
Mass
Right?
Yeah.
attending Catholics
Massive
is
tiny Catholic.
yeah.
Okay. Uh, are you able to, within that group, be able to say, let's just say, people who go to church once a month, they're the ones who are saying that concern for the poor is top of their list, or is it just the whole survey is saying concern for the
Yeah.
poor is the top of the list? Or do you
Yeah.
segment by mass participation in any way?
Yes, we do. So
I
we're
think, yeah,
asking in terms of their
yeah,
engagement. And what we find is those who are weekly,
yeah,
or in our terms, often will combine that those who are weekly and those who are at least once a month,
right. Okay,
because it's picking up the elderly or the infirm or families with young children. Uh, so taking that as the active Catholics, we're finding there almost all these questions in terms of our faith and actions all come up higher.
right.
Those who are not quite monthly or a couple times a year or never,
Yeah,
their numbers are lower, but they're still high.
right,
So it's you know, something like the weekly mass attenders might list this 75% of the time, but those who are infrequent then list it 60% of the time. And those who never come would still list it like 50%. Uh,
right.
so on the CARA surveys, our concern and focus is the Catholic community, which is everybody who's
Sure.
a baptized Catholic and identifies as such. So when we separate it out, we see this pattern. Again, the more active and engaged you are in the church, well, guess what? It's no surprise the more consistent your own attitudes and actions are with church teachings and expectations. Uh, what's interesting is it's not as if the those who are not active have disassociated. That doesn't go hand in hand. It's less so, but it's still very clearly there. And in many ways, when we're able to do comparisons, the inactive Catholics look much more like their Catholic brothers and sisters than their Protestant neighbors.
In what way?
In the way that, when we ask on something about different questions about belief or social teachings or activities or priorities, they tend, again, it's going to be much weaker, but that you can see the tendency is towards kind of a more common church practice. So there's a piece that for us on the sociological side is intriguing, that 30% or more of self-identified Catholics. So when you ask them, what are you? They say, I'm Catholic. Do you go to church? Never. That's a big block. It's a third of all our Catholic brothers and sisters. And then there's probably another, quarter who show up at Mass, a couple times a year. But it's about half the Catholic population. They persist in saying they are Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what's unusual, because in other religious bodies, if people are no longer active or engaged, they'll often go more generically, I'm a Christian or something, but they won't necessarily say I'm a Baptist or I'm a Methodist. So there's this piece of the Catholic identity that's very enduring and consistent. And so on these attitudes, it may be much weaker, but it's kind of still trending in that direction.
Yeah, I can totally understand what you're saying. I mean, just from my personal experience with family and friends, we all have family and friends who no longer go to church, but they would never say they're not Catholic, though.
Right.
And they could really disagree with church teaching and all that stuff too, but they still would not say that they're not Catholic. There's something just
it's in the water, as I say,
in the water, in the
baptism.
ethos. Yeah, it's really palpable. I mean, and I was just thinking about that too. I teach at a high school in San Francisco, and I know that most of my students don't go to church. But I was just reading their final essays, and a lot of them were mentioning about being Catholic, and I'm thinking, like, I would never have guessed that they really cared about their Catholic identity, but they write about it in not a dismissive way. I mean, they don't really. They're, for some reason, they don't think that you could be a very identifiable Catholic without going to church, and and that's fine. Like I'm not questioning any of that. But what do you think is behind that? Like you said, it's in the water. Like what else do you pick up from just the years that you've been doing so much research? What else is behind that? Why does the indelible mark really it really is indelible, so to speak?
I think in a way, within the Catholic community, there is this sense of identification. So, you're one of us, even though we might not like you or agree with you, but you're one of us. And again, historically, over the centuries, the church has, fought against this separation or exclusion, from the earliest centuries. Baptism, it is real. And so you are baptized into this community. And there's not, in a sense, a way to leave the community. Now, you can look at that in a negative way, but I think most people fundamentally see this in a positive way. I'm Catholic. And I don't have to agree with Father or at the parish to come there. And in a sense, I'm a Catholic and need to be responded to. So I think it's a key part of people's identity, and more also a sense of belonging. And we find in other research, particularly with younger people, is that this strong desire for belonging, but it's also, up against this sense of kind of American individualism. I'm going to make my own choices. Nobody's going to tell me what to do, but I want to be a Catholic, and I am a Catholic. Well, if you're going to belong, that means there's some other influences that are forming you and kind of creating your worldview that are at play. So you see that tension kind of constantly with it. So we found recent research in a book we published 2 years ago on the faith and spiritual life of young adult Catholics. In there, we did a large national survey among young adults, and we found that regular Mass attendance was running somewhere around 15%, give or take. And that's pretty much what we expected. We had found from other studies that if you're looking at this 18 to 35-year-old range, that was not kind of out of the ordinary. It's also the age range where basically you have the lowest church attendance among Catholics, among any denominational grouping. It's just kind of the age pattern. But as we found that, we also asked this question, are you involved in any other kind of faith-based or faith-related activities? Like a Bible study, a book club, a sports league, we went down. And I think in your own research, you also asked me those related questions. We were expecting something higher. We were stunned that 60% said yes. So some of these are very kind of nominally faith connected, but it's within a faith context. But it made us sit back and say, we just sort of take for granted that weekly Mass attendance is the metric to define what's active in your faith. And when we looked at this data and the richness of it, we're saying, well, I get that. I think it is. But what's the data telling us? We can't turn around and say these are not actively engaged in their faith. They are. But it's not in Sunday Mass attendance. And we ask deeper about it. If you're not coming to Mass, why not? And we get back people saying, oh, it's my schedule. I'm too busy. I got this, I got that. A string of items. And some of it, it's boring. Or I don't feel welcome. So there's this tension that's there between it. But I think also in a cultural side, there's a real shift that younger people do not see that attending weekly Mass is an obligation of their faith. They think it's good, but my quip on this was I would be a little startled to see someone saying, I would never miss Wednesday evening adoration. Do you go to Mass each Sunday? Oh, no, well, my schedule gets tied up. And I'm thinking, you would never miss Wednesday night adoration with this group, but you're not coming to church on Sunday with the parish. I'm of a generational side that's like, okay, this doesn't compute, but this is what's real. And here at CARA, as the research center, our focus is the data needs to speak for itself. We're not here as a think tank to advocate anything. We're here to collect the data, kind of to share it with church decision makers. And then what does this begin to mean? And it's data like that we try to bring back to, some of the national ministries on youth or young adults, other groupings, to say, you tell us, what does it mean? You're the ones directly involved with young people in this dynamic. We have found the data. We're not sure exactly what it means. But to say, if you're not at Sunday Mass, you're not an active Catholic, that doesn't match up with the data. So what's the metric? How do we define it? So it's not agreeing or disagreeing with what's going on. It's just saying, here it is. How do we understand it?
Yeah. So looking to understand it, I mean, is that something that we can attribute to distrust of institutions by younger generations, which is definitely definitely a thing, especially among the church, who has given plenty of reasons not to trust it over especially recent years? Is it them sort of just chasing the feeling? If they, if they feel like they encounter the Lord more deeply in adoration, then they're going to stick with that. And because maybe mass, like you said, is boring, or it's just not, they don't feel anything when they go to mass. It's what do you attribute that?
I think it's a mix of those items, but I also think, the most simple or human dynamic is often at play of feeling welcome, yeah, at a church. And then it's the uh, sort of that participation together of belonging, which can be key. So, how do we, as a former pastor, how do we create a more welcoming environment?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think links into other data that we've had from CARA. One of the things we often highlight with parishes and dioceses is just the sheer mobility of the Catholic population. So there's been a massive movement of Catholics from the Northeast and Midwest to the South and West. So we see that. We also have this large immigrant Catholic population. 1/4 of all Catholics are foreign-born immigrants. 1/4 in the whole country. And that immigrant population tends to be in the South and West also. And so we have all this movement and churning of Catholics. I think in our mind, we see a parish as being a very stable community. The reality is, it's probably everything but that there's this constant churn and movement of Catholics. And parishes are still defined, geographically. Now, people move between parishes easily, but they're still defined geographically. And so when we look at a given geography, there's huge movements. And if the parish kind of sees itself, as a set, stable community, that of course will welcome a visitor or a newcomer. That's a different thing as opposed to saying, this is a very dynamic community that's always changing. And therefore, the parish community needs to also be a dynamic community that's always changing and welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of, what's the concept in the head of the pastoral leaders can make a big difference, because then you kind of approach things very differently in terms of how people are just greeted at Sunday Mass, and welcomed, and what type of activities you have. If you recognize there's always this very mobile Catholic population, as opposed to being very stable. So
there's also
yeah.
There's also the reality that the Mass is just a complex tradition and liturgy. I could do you think that just appreciation of what's happening at the Mass, maybe through deeper formation or something like that, is also needed for people to be able to say, yeah, I would prioritize the Mass rather than something more simple, like whether group or private adoration or something.
Well, I mean, the Mass with the Eucharist, it's the celebration of the whole community. And so some of the focus is the Eucharist is always in that context of the community. When we take communion to the shut-ins or to hospitals, there's the emphasis, it's from this community celebration that a member of the community praying has now come to you, who is not able to be with us, to share in this Eucharist. And do we kind of acknowledge or emphasize that enough, as opposed to something being very individualized? So there's this, and we look at all the sacraments in the same way. I think our sort of American temptation is we start to individualize the sacraments, and the sacraments are all very communal, very communal.
I would almost argue that a lot of the data that from our survey would show that the Eucharist celebration was more individualized, that this
Mhm.
was a place to be able to receive something that this person needed, just say sacramental grace,
Yeah.
in order to be able to, integrate it into the rest of their week. But the community being the drive for going to Sunday Mass, I don't know if that was really revealed very well in our data. What do you think, Dave?
No, I agree. I mean, it's hard to say. We didn't ask about motivations. But the conclusion that we drew was that there seems to be a significant percentage of mass attending Catholics, regularly mass attending, by the way, at least every week, who must be going either out of a sense of obligation or out of a sense of, this is a social thing that I do. And not connecting it with kind of a more integrated life the rest of the week, so to speak. You know, well, so I'm curious. My plan today was to kind of mention certain aspects of what we found in our study, and then ask you how it compares to what you guys, the research you do. But you seem to be really familiar with our study, so let me just ask you, broadly, are there other things that jumped out to you, either because they were surprising findings or particularly dissonant with what you found, or those types of things?
Well, I mean, on some of the findings, I mean, all of the data is helpful. It's giving us more information, understanding Catholics. So, in the context of the report, uh, both the way the survey participants were identified, starts to skew it because it's overwhelmingly women, so
Mm-hmm.
there's not a balancing in there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's a much older grouping.
Mm-hmm.
It tends to be more middle-aged
Mm-hmm.
uh, on that end. It's very white.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so these are factors, and then there's also a piece you have there about on sort of political views. And
Mm-hmm.
so it skews much more conservative
Mm-hmm.
than we would find speaking of the whole general Catholic population.
Okay.
So that's saying, okay,
Even
when
the
you,
age thing, even the age doesn't skew older generally in the Catholic population.
no, I mean, there's, for mass attending, it does,
Yeah. Right.
but Catholics in general, I
Okay.
mean,
Okay. I
there's a
see.
little bit of a drop off on the younger end, uh, but it tends to be, a fairly balanced grouping.
Okay. Would you say that the other things are also consistent with mass attending Catholics, skewing more women, skewing more right wing?
They would be more women, but not that many more.
Mm-hmm.
So the women might be more like at 60% as opposed to
Yeah.
75%.
Mm-hmm.
The the older grouping would be older, so that would fit in that way. And then on the ethnicity, no, it would be more diverse
Mm-hmm.
with that grouping. Uh, and then on the political side would not be quite that conservative.
Okay.
So it would be more conservative. Uh, so when we're looking at that, so once we look at that saying, okay, what are people asking for and looking for? So this is helpful here in the data you have. Uh, and some of it would be to break down and look at more specifically on CARA's research, uh, generally because where our focus is kind of the application, applied research. So what are you going to be able to do with the data you have? How is it going to be actionable? And so we try to stay away from kind of a broader item and try to get things very particular, specific activities. Uh, so when we did this larger survey with young adults and say, are you involved in any other faith-based activities? We gave a whole range of things and then others and tallied all this up. So we wanted to make sure we captured what those activities were. And then we could also start to sort it out a bit and say, okay, there's, you know, Bible study. But if we say Bible study, uh, we're going to miss out on some grouping that's basically the same thing, but they're calling it, a different name.
True.
So we can pull all those things together and start to see that data. So here's that dilemma when, we speak to corporal works of mercy, as opposed to saying, you're working with the homeless, you're working with mothers in need, you're working with refugees, you're whatever, you get a whole listing. That gives a sense, here's what's going on with it. That's kind of enriches the data for those types of activities. So that would just be a piece that how to move forward because, I'm not quite sure when someone says I aspire, more on the corporal works of mercy, what exactly does that mean? I mean, unless you're providing a very detailed definition.
We gave examples to remind people, but yeah, you're right. It's a good question. I assume it means, being more giving of my time to those in need, and yeah, the phrasing definitely matters. That is something that you guys have done research on, the impact of volunteering, particularly on the volunteer, right?
Yes. So we've done both. I did before I came to CARA some research on the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. Then since being here at CARA, we did it for the Catholic Volunteer Network and other volunteer groups. And what we're looking at is just kind of the impact of that year of volunteer service. And so the surprising items, and again, some of it is not surprising, is that when we did the survey, we're asking most of these volunteer groups, they have maintained a fairly good contact list of former volunteers. Partly because they're kind of raising money with them and help supporting the effort. But it's a great avenue then for follow-up. So when we did the survey of former volunteers, we were getting volunteers from 20, 30 years ago on down. So that people's enthusiasm is clear when they're a volunteer and can be very enthusiastic, in the year or two afterwards. But now we really wanted to know, what about 10, 20 years afterwards? You've gone into your careers, you're married, you have kids, whatever. That was the real interesting part because as time went on, we had a series of items about the volunteer experience, asking what was, most significant for them. And so these elements were all real significant in the year or two after the volunteer service. What came back 10, 20 years later kept identifying the two things. One was the structure of prayer and reflection in the experience. And the second was the community experience. And so normally in some of the different volunteer programs, some of them have a very specific and spelled out kind of prayer reflection element each week or during the experience. Others are a little looser. It's like every Monday night, the group has to get together and do something, but they don't define it that much. However it was, these two things came back out, that prayer reflection and the community experience. So we found that very interesting to see it. The one that really surprised us that we were not looking for, but it was, when it came out, it kind of bites you on the nose, is, of course, we ask, are you single, married, divorced, separated? Are you a priest, brother, sister, deacon? Variety of items here. And what we had, and we did this first with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps maybe 20 years ago, is the incidence of marriage stability, is how I would phrase it, is that among the former Jesuit volunteers, and we had thousands answering this survey, 2% had been divorced. And so at the time, we went back and said, okay, we want to look at this age range of Catholics who have all been college educated. We had a couple other criteria. What's the incidence of divorce? What does this mean? So we did that. And what we got back was, well, in that, making all those controls and the age range, for their peers, the divorce was about 12%.
Still very low compared to the national average.
Yeah, but the key piece was this difference wasn't like a little incremental difference. 2%, 12%. So we were astounded. And then another separate researcher was doing something on the Jesuit volunteers. And I made mention, so they included to get the marital status in their survey. Totally different. They came back with the same thing. So then in around 2015, we did the Catholic Volunteer Network study. I said, please, 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 we need to include this question because is this just an accidental item, but we're finding, and I can't figure out why this would be unique to the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. So we did this with everybody. This was like 60 different groups. And we came back and we got a similar number. So it was higher.
Are these specifically people who are spending kind of dedicating a year or more of their life?
Okay. Generally 1 year. One year.
Got it.
And so when we got the similar item, it's just quite remarkable. We did some focus groups, follow-up interviews. And what came from it, the two things that were helpful with former volunteers who said, well, yeah, and they thought it could be explained. One was said, well, they always say that arguments over finances are the biggest challenge to a younger couple. And they said, in the year of volunteer service, we all have to live simply. And in the course of the year, you realize that you really don't need much to be happy. And that was a very important lesson, practical lesson. I said, okay, that kind of fits here. The other one that I think was probably more insightful was the former volunteer saying the experience, both in the community and in the work, is it makes you clarify your values. After that 1 year of service, it's much clearer in your mind what is important, and what's, key to your life and happiness in your relationships with others. And I thought that probably makes a lot more sense to begin to explain this difference, because for their peer group, not all Catholics, but college educated, we kind of got these other Catholics. This would be kind of the missing piece that may be explaining much more of what's going on. So we found that to be a fascinating finding from it. The other piece, and this was in the CVN study, is we asked, are you today a priest, a brother, a sister, a novice, a seminarian? And we put this in there just to collect some data on vocations. And again, this went out to thousands of people, all these different groups. What we found is that the respondents, 2% of all the women had entered a novitiate, and some 10, 11% of all the men had entered a seminary or novitiate. It just incredible in the sense of, in this pool, which are thousands of young men and women across the country every year, there's probably, I would say, the most dense pool of future vocations.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember commenting, I was talking with Archbishop Kurtz, who was president of the Bishops' Conference at the time, and I said to him, Archbishop, I don't want to tell you what to do, but this is what I would do if I were you. If there's volunteer communities in your diocese, I would make a point to go out at least once a year and have dinner with them at their community and just thank them for their service and remind them how important it is and how much the church appreciates it. I said, I bet you we could see the needle move on the vocation piece if we put a little more encouragement and support to this body of young adult Catholics.
Hmm.
So uh, it's just one of these results that we got it. I mean, our first thing, both on the marriage item and on the vocation end, was that we made a mistake. And we went back and scanned all the data again because it was just, we weren't even looking there.
Mm-hmm.
And here it came. So those were kind of two surprising things that over the years, and sometimes it's makes this part of the works so interesting
Yeah.
because where you least expect it or you're not looking, you suddenly say, wait a minute, this
Yeah.
data is not, so why is it? And occasionally you're disappointed because you find out you made a mistake. And you
No,
have to
but it
go
is
correct it
amazing.
and rerun it. But then when you realize, no, that's exactly the data you have.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's kind of very positive.
Yeah, I mean, just by asking age, we had a whole discourse on generational differences in
Yeah.
discipleship. So
Yes.
so yeah, I totally agree. Just thinking a little bit more about the volunteers that you surveyed, do you ask about what compels them to join? Or what goes into it? Because I wonder if there's. I mean, that's so important, right? If this is so impactful, both for generating vocations to the priesthood and religious life, as well, or even diaconate, as well as to not just marriages, but faithful marriages that last. What is there efforts being done to increase the attractiveness to draw even more people into this?
Oh, as far as I know, when I get to see the regular mailings and information from the Catholic Volunteer Network, there are big efforts underway. Uh, and some of it, the number of volunteers has declined in the last couple of years, partly due to COVID. So that had an impact. That was clear enough. And then a little more so, it didn't bounce back. And some of it is, is it, the economy and the job market, is strong, and therefore people are getting a variety of opportunities. But it's also just, again, how do you do the outreach, the contacts to items? And what we find in asking is that, they're basically very generous young men and women uh, who are serious about their faith. But the seriousness may not always fit our classifications.
Mm-hmm.
They're serious about their faith. Do you go to mass every Sunday? No, but they're serious about this. They're very engaged in it. And what we found also about their mass attendance is, again, their peers may be coming to mass, 25% of them may be. Well, out of this group, we find it's 50% or more, so it's again, not a marginal difference, but quite significant. But I think there's a certain part of the self-selection bias, which is for generous young men and women who have a serious connection with their faith, then this year of voluntary service has an appeal and attraction naturally. And it tends to strengthen their faith, strengthen their generosity and service in so many ways. So it's just how to keep encouraging or building these items. So I think that would be the key.
So, Tom, what do you think is the implication of all this? I mean, I know you can just kind of just give your personal take on this. I know that you're not meant to interpret the data necessarily. You could give that to church leaders to kind of be able to take your data and make their decisions. But if we are now looking at a future church where those who identify with Catholicism have that identity more wrapped up in just their service or participating in some type of communal effort for service and not in participation at Mass, what do you think is the implication of that?
In the long run, not good. And I think it's how do we connect this, with that Sunday celebration of the Eucharist as a community. And it's also looking at, you know, the engagement, the welcome, the inclusion. I find in a number of, over the years, different campaigns or efforts, to revitalize parish life or this or that. My first question is the campaign or effort, does it ask me to change? And if it doesn't, then I'm a little suspicious of it right off the bat. Because it has to be something on my part, either as the pastor of the parish, or a member of the parish community, that I need to be doing something different. It's not your fault. And that's simply, we got to change something in you to get you here at church. There's also a point, no, there's something that has to change with me or in the church itself to be able to include. I think I'm blanking on the name, Rebuilt, the effort out of, was it Nativity Parish in Timonium, Maryland?
That's right.
Yeah. So in their focus about a radical welcome, one of the things somebody told me, it says, they have parking lot ministers. So there are people in the parking lot on Saturday, Sunday to welcome you when you drive in. And for young families to help get the kids together, carry the baby carrier or whatever, or with someone elderly or a little infirm to have a reserved spot right closer to the church and help. And there's a part of they're kind of bending over backwards to think of every way to be welcoming and including. So they have lots of different examples in other parishes where they have the same. But I think that basic disposition is key. And it's going to take a impact in so many different ways. We've seen it when I was in North Carolina at the beginning when the increase in the Hispanic migration into the state. A pastor who spoke Spanish, and there were just a few then, but would start offering Mass, in a rural county where there wasn't a church. So you'd have to rent a hall and have Mass in Spanish on Sunday afternoon. And my gosh, the folks that would turn out. But the key was, it wasn't a 30-minute drive away. It was now only 10 or 15 minutes in a rural county. And it was in Spanish. And this was among, particularly, these were often field workers. And so there was little, if any, English known. But just having, and I used to go, and I don't speak Spanish, I had a translator, but just that somebody was showing up in that expression of the church's interest. It's one unique little setting, but you would get occasional somebody at the regular parish. But when you did this, suddenly we had a huge group. It's just thinking, how do we begin to do this? And I think another key element from our other studies on young adults is on the parish end, resisting the temptation that the parish or the parish leadership has to be in control or in charge. No, this group wants to come and meet for some Bible study. Let them meet.
Amen.
they may not be doing the Bible study the way I would want to do it, or I think is, let them meet. Let them meet. So I think it's that sense of welcome and engagement that often is so critical. Uh, and the other piece would be on that mobility issue is the example I use is, the city of Houston is overwhelmed, with transplants coming down for jobs. And so many are younger families. And the reality across, especially the booming South and West, is that these young families move in and they're huge, more suburban parishes that again can often be a challenge just to get into the parking lot, much less in church. Here's a young family who have just moved from Pittsburgh to Houston, with a baby, and they're trying to come to the parish and just start to envision all the obstacles of having to get there early to get into the parking lot, of how to get into this big church where you don't know a soul, and all the different issues, and the baby's cranky or whatever.
The heat and humidity of Houston.
I mean, you can just start seeing
Yeah.
it and just say, well, they're newcomers. How many times are they going to try? Or it just becomes, let's wait till next month. Let's wait till October when it's cooler. Or what, and so we find in our data, when we're asking people, so often the reasons they're not engaged are, it's more unintentional. This young family, it just gets to be such a hassle to try and engage in the parish. And the parish is not trying to push them away or anything, but the parish is often just unaware. Somehow we need to, but even there, when I've gone to speak in these other booming dioceses, the pastors look at me so startled. They are overwhelmed and can't keep up with what they have in front of them. And for me to show up and say, and guess what, guys? You're each missing hundreds and hundreds of families. Because you need to be, they're like, I can't cope with what I have. And I think sometimes we just forget that very human dimension of evangelization, of inclusion and welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And we think in some grand theory, and that's why I think, when they had parking lot ministers, what an odd idea, but probably very effective.
It sounds to me like it's being mindful at meeting people at every point of the customer journey, so to speak,
Yes.
right?
Someone once said that we should send everyone to Disney World to be trained.
Yeah.
There's that sense. The other one is, just basic things of when you call a parish, what do you hear?
Yeah, totally.
And is it kind of a bureaucratic, off-putting, or is it this real gracious welcome, inclusion?
Yeah, we have many front doors, and all of them need to be welcoming. Yeah.
It's so interesting, Tom. This applies to me too. I mean, like I know I'm not at a parish, so when I'm doing weddings or baptisms these days, it's all for people I know or former students, that kind of thing. And I always get nervous. I'm like, oh, I have to go to this parish I don't know about, and I have to make a point of entry. And even as a priest, I'm feeling like, how difficult is this going to be? Like, trying to communicate with this other parish to say I'm coming in. Yes, this is a person who doesn't go to your parish, like all that kind of stuff, I mean, it's taxing even from the standpoint of being a priest trying to function within the infrastructure of the church. Dave always hears me lament so many times. I'm like, I have to go to different parishes all over the country, and I go to their website. I can't even figure out who the pastor is at the parish because it's not clear as to who I'm supposed to be talking to because it's not on their website. Like, why is that so? Why is the personnel who are the ones who run the church so buried in some website? Like, I should see that stuff right away. Like, I should know what the mass times are, who's here at this place so I can immediately contact. So like it's even the website stuff just drives me crazy.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you
I
know,
yeah, Father Tom, I want to get back to I wanted two responses to what you just said, and I know
Mhm.
we're getting up on time here. Um, you said something that was kind of startling to me. You said, I always ask myself the question, does the campaign or effort ask me to change? If not, I'm suspicious of it. And it was shocking to me, I think, because by and large, the population feels exactly the opposite way, right? Like I don't know anyone besides myself who is kind of interested when like Mormon missionaries knock on the door, right?
Yeah, right.
Like, I actually think it's kind of interesting. I'll engage in the conversation. This is not a desired action among people, but
Yeah,
the difference is you were talking about a very healthy parish context where people are actually in community together and they trust one another, and that is the place where you can not only make an ask that requires change of someone, but actually expect them to respond positively to it.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's just campaigns of, if we were doing everything well, we wouldn't have people disengaged from the church. So there must be something that I need to do different,
Yeah.
that I need to change, that's going to stretch me or push me in some way.
Yeah.
Uh,
How do you
what is,
cultivate? How have you cultivated that posture?
I think, again, this sounds like the synod on synodality, which is you just listen to people. Uh, I'm often startled by people who call CARA, on the website, you see it, and here's the number, and they call and it hits the system. And I pick up and I say, "Good afternoon, this is Father Gaunt." And they're like, well, I was just calling and I didn't want to get you or disturb you or I'm like, fine, no, what is it? Uh, and take down. And we get people just saying, I just never expected, that the director of the operation would be the one picking up the phone. Uh, but here, our piece is, you know, it should go into voicemail only simply because everybody's out at lunch, or nobody's here. But someone picks up and you talk to a real person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so simple. And then kind of listen to their question as opposed to reading off a menu.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and today, it's like that becomes a bigger and bigger value because in our day-to-day life, we have that less and less often.
There's so much noise. You touched on
Yeah.
the exact place I was. Oh, go ahead.
So the other example, often enough coming into a fast food place or a coffee shop, and the server says, good afternoon or how are you? And I said, oh, I'm doing well. And how are you today? Almost all the time, they are startled because I actually asked them, and I looked them in the eye. And I thought, that is such a small human gesture. But for this person, day in and day out, dealing with hundreds of people, you know, and I might well be only, four that actually inquired back. Otherwise, we're treating them like a machine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are it's the small things that matter. So when I came to CARA, and first got on top of all this data, especially on parish life, I found myself uh, a little sad because I just kept recalling my years as a pastor. And I said, I wish I understood this then. I would have done so many other things differently, and I would have changed the way, and it would nothing profound, but just would have shifted items and realized, no, 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 these simple activities, engagements. Uh, you look at whether in Advent or Lent, what are the family prayer customs, rituals? They're there, they're rich. Our Catholic heritage is full of it, and with different cultures. Do we encourage and keep building that up? in that way. We talk about mass attendance. The biggest day is Ash Wednesday. And it's like, I don't go to Mass all year, but I'll get my ashes on Ash Wednesday because having ashes on my forehead is somehow meaningful in my identity as a Catholic, even though I don't go to church.
Right.
So part of me says, it doesn't compute for me, but it's real.
Right.
And so
Yeah, we're
I
back to
need
where
to
we
deal,
start.
I need to deal with the reality in front of me as opposed to some caricature that I may have in my head.
That's right.
So that's what the whole point of this podcast is, and also just the fact that you landed on listening is the thing that keeps on coming back in every single conversation.
Yeah, I was
Like
literally gonna
we
I was gonna
yeah,
drive you there myself, and then you said it. I was
I
like,
was like
perfect.
like I keep on saying it seems like the most radical way to live the Christian life right now is to become a listener without an agenda. Like that's what I've just been what we not me but what we've been coming to a conclusion with. Like you every age of the church has some way to radically embrace the Christian message, and it's not martyrdom, it's not monasticism, but it's this radical listening without agenda right now. That seems to be the way to break through, especially when we're talking about polarization in the church, society. Like, how can you just listen without trying to win an argument? Like, it seems to be the most prophetic way to live Christianity right
Yeah.
now.
And I think a piece we get from Pope Francis, the image I have, is Pope Francis keeps calling on us, particularly as pastoral leaders, not to have our finger out pointed, shaking at somebody.
Mhm.
The gesture is an arm around the shoulder and walking with and listening to. And there's a piece of, I'm not changing doctrine. I'm not agreeing, disagreeing, whatever. It's just the arm around and walking with. That makes all the difference. And as you get to other issues in church teachings, it's in a whole nother context and reality for both of you when it's that way as opposed to a finger pointing.
And to John's point about, so I want to tie listening on an individual level to the listening that you do as a researcher, right? And I wanted to let you know that the Hans Plate, the founder of Vinia Research, who we worked with on this study, paid you guys a compliment, because he sees CARA as a little bit more of academic research, and I know you're interested in applying it, so no disrespect there at all. What he particularly appreciated about what you're doing is that in some ways, because you don't have necessarily a goal in mind, there's no agenda with the research. You're just doing it to discover, purely. It's more pure that way. And so I guess I wanted to pass that on and ask you, do you agree that that one of the ways that we can be doing this radical listening is, or one of the ways we do this radical listening is through the research that you conduct?
Oh, I think very much so. And it's just it's giving another opportunity or avenue to listen or how to listen to other people. And it's key because we'll do reports and we'll send them out, and I'll brace myself because I know somebody's going to react to it, when it comes from right, left, in the middle. Somebody's not happy with what we reported. But also, CARA's 60 years following this has proved well because time and again, people come back and say, no, but we trust CARA. There's not an agenda. They're not trying to back up right, left, or middle. We're just telling you, here's what the data is saying. And we're handing it to you. You say, and you interpret it or apply this. And often enough, what can be so fruitful when we do CARA research is we often have like a 90-minute Zoom session or in person with the client who commissioned the research. And, if this is in the diocese, it'll be with the bishop and his senior staff or something like that. And we'll do a quick overview, like PowerPoint presentation of the research findings. And then we open it up. And people are trying to understand a piece of data or some qualification. And we keep saying, and what does it mean? And then people's comments and observations, they are just wonderfully rich conversations. Because these are just ordinary folks doing it, will come back with an insight. And they're hearing something more that I didn't. And this is what becomes so critical in that process, the listening. So how do you have it that this is kind of not only just a two-way street, but often enough what is critical of who defines what the issue is? It's if we kept saying the issue of active Catholics is Sunday Mass attendance, then we'd come back and say, we're going to hell in a handbasket. We're down to 22%, for Sunday Mass attendance. Well, we ask the question, are you involved in faith-based activities? And then we get a totally different world, which makes us say, okay, what's going on? These are not people disengaged from their faith. These may be people disengaged from Sunday Mass, but that's not disengaged from their faith. It'd be the same of saying, how often do you go to benediction? And that's what makes you an active Catholic. It's like, no, I mean, it's a particular, so it's a part of our faith, our community life. But we are Catholic because we were baptized. And that's through 21 centuries, the church has held to that through thick and thin.
It's so interesting. It has me a whole different way to think about just the importance of baptism. I sometimes I kind of write it off as like, well, some people just kind of got brought into that because of just some form of tradition or some form of but there's a power to that. And I think this gives witness to it.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other piece with it would be that, again, it's somehow in the water, but all these baptized Catholics who never darken the door of a church, they intuitively know if they call the parish, somebody's going to respond. If they're in the hospital, someone will show up. You don't have to take membership. You don't have to tithe. You don't have to do anything other than having been baptized, and Father John or myself will be there. And in terms of the church and as a minister of the church, it's not, it's just, if there's a baptized Catholic who is called, you answer. And that's very unusual. And somehow people kind of know that and hold on to it. And that sense of belonging, again, even if it's that tenuous or thin, is there.
Religion to Reality is an initiative of DeSales Media created by me, Dave Plisky, and is produced and edited by Connor Donnelly and Nick Strapoli. If you found value in our conversation, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you love the show, ratings and reviews go a long way toward letting others know about the show. Go to religiontoreality.org for more details and resources.